Right. So, what we discussed in the previous session about the intro part of TOGAF, followed by what are the different elements or the parts we have in TOGAF and all. Of course, I'm going to remind those things in the coming time, because irrespective of the kind of version are we using, either it can be 9 or 10, whatever the uh, processes we have, whatever the methods do we follow, the processes and all everything remains common. So before I'm getting into that, let me give you an official introduction about what TOGAF is all about. That is what we are about to discuss today. And why is it TOGAF is required? Point number 2. At the same time, in what way this TOGAF framework is used in the organization level. 3 things. Later on, the remaining parts. TOGAF is a framework, you can call, because whenever we work on enterprise architecture in any organization, transforming towards enterprise level transformation, irrespective of the departments as well as the functionalities they were managing. While implementing any kind of enterprise architecture in organization level, it's always required for us to use some tools or frameworks. There are 2 major frameworks we have. One is about Jackman framework, and the second one about TOGAF. This is a prominent framework now and then. Of course, this is for a very long time. TOGAF is a framework which majorly we are using in the organizations. The advantage in importance of implementing TOGAF framework in the organization level, majorly it will be useful in designing. At the same time, if you want to design or plan or implement, and at the same time, if you want to maintain any kind of enterprise architectures and all everything, so that can be done using the TOGAF framework. In the TOGAF framework, majorly how this can be implemented, how enterprise architecture can be implemented in the organization level, and how this can be designed. That is where generally architectural designing come into picture. I'll tell you later, right, what is architectural designing, etc. All that. Right? So at the same time, there will be some guidelines and principles, meta model, architectural development methods. There are different parts of different parts which will be a part of TOGAF framework, which can be used. So using all these, any organization, when you want to implement an enterprise architecture, if you want to design any architecture, or if you want to plan any architectural implementation in the organization level, or else if there is any kind of implementation you want to do by implementing the enterprise architecture, or if you want to maintain that, because it's not only about implementation, but you have to maintain this in long run to have a better business as well as enterprise agility. So in regard to that, it's always important for us to implement the TOGAF framework. This is what generally TOGAF is all about. At the same time, why TOGAF are we using in the organization level is all something majorly focusing on these areas.
Okay.
But when it comes to TOGAF itself is concerned, we have 2 major now and then, 9.1 and 9.2. These are 2. At the same time, 10 edition. 9 and 10. I can classify this as 9 and 10. First of all, being into certification, when we want to move on, either learning on our own for experience purpose or exposure purpose, or for certification for anything. End of the day, people must be knowing about what are all the differences you see from 9 and 10. Okay, do remember this. What is the difference between 9 and 10 is what something which we must be knowing first.
Okay.
So if you want to know about the difference between 9 and 10, see, TOGAF framework, meta model, architectural governance, majorly to align with architectural development methods, as well as capability frameworks, because whatever the points I discussed in the yesterday session, if you remember, in continuation to that, these are all common. Either we follow 9 or 10, both are same. right? So because you don't see any difference, because 10 is not something more different when you are comparing to 9, because 10 is an addition we have introduced now and then. Of course, TOGAF has introduced now and then to make it more simplified. That is point number one, because simplification is what something which under TOGAF 10 is what something focused more. At the same time, more they are focusing more on the digital kind of, because whatever the digital content they want to implement, right? So digital content, they're focusing more on that. So that is only the difference you see when we are comparing from uh, 9 to 10, because in 9, if you see the comparison, in 9 you don't see 3 parts. Let me write down here, it's better. Let me write down
Okay.
the major difference. We see from TOGAF 9 versus 10 as follows. Whatever the points I discussed with you yesterday, even of course, I'm going to discuss about those points now, about architectural capability framework, architectural development method, guidelines, content framework. Anyway, that detailed explanation I'm going to provide. Anyway, that will be there, right? So those are all something ADM framework, principles, practices, governance structure. All these points are something essentially important, and these are all something common for any TOGAF implementation. Either it can be 9 or 10, whatever the implementations are we talking about, these are all something common everywhere. Because as in when I see, like, for example, if you talk about introduction about enterprise architecture or development method, right? So these are all common. But the major differences you see are three major differences you see from 9 to 10. So one, if you talk about 10, right? So when you talk about 10 majorly focusing on the agility part.
Okay.
Agility, point number one. Okay, agility. Because if you remember, if you can go back to the yesterday session, along with stakeholder engagement and all, if you remember, I discussed about the agile part. If you remember,
Okay.
I discussed about agile. I discussed about enterprise agile transformation, right? So when we are transforming organizations to the enterprise level, scaled agile framework is what something we use. I think yesterday I have given an intro part of that. So that's the reason why am I given that intro part there, because of this reason. Because when it comes to the TOGAF 10 itself is concerned, the one major difference you see from 9 to 10 is one is agility. That is point number one. Agility is the one. Generally, this agility again will be classified into two different parts. One is enterprise agility. Second is a business agility. Okay, so I'll take a separate session about these two things. Okay, later. Okay, otherwise it deviates now. I don't want to deviate this. So there are two again. In agility, there will be two different things. One is enterprise agility. Second is a business agility. Especially whenever we are implementing scaled agile framework in the organization level to implement across departments in the organization, to make our business decisions more effective and accurate, and scaled agile framework is implementing by us.
Okay.
So agility is one difference you see when we are taking 10 into consideration. Point number one. Point number two, the second about the microservices architecture. The first one about agility, as I mentioned you, agility majorly focusing on enterprise and as well as business agility. This is point number one. Point number two, microservices architecture. Microservices architecture, I think you must have known about, means listen about microservices as a concept.
Cloud is basically example of microservices architecture.
No, it's not only cloud, because see, if it's not a cloud, right, even in on-premise also we have.
Okay.
Microservice is a concept in such a way. I'll give you, before I'm getting into microservices architecture, let me give you a brief understanding over the application first. Because if you understand the application, you will be knowing all these well. For example, if you see any application, usually application will be of 3 layers. The first we call it as presentation layer. Second one is called business logic layer. The third one is called data layer. Am I right? Right? Three different layers you see any application. The one is presentation layer. What is that you see it on the screen is called presentation layer, right? On screen, whatever you see, that's what generally we call it as presentation layer. Second, business logic layer. Business logic layer means, for example, you have given 1 + 2. When you press an enter button being a user, you are getting a result called 3. How you got this? There was a program written by a developer for adding of two numbers. So it need not be 1 + 2. It can be 500 + 300 also.
Okay.
Adding of two numbers is what a business logic has written by a program. So where he has written the program, he has written the program in the application. Why in the application? Because generally this is where generally we talk about languages. Let us go aside from microservices, and I'm trying to explain you about the languages first. Then I'll come back to the architecture so that you will be knowing well. Normally in the field of IT, there are different languages. IT have different languages. Please listen carefully this part. If you have any confusion, you please ask.
Okay.
Don't hesitate.
Okay.
One is IT languages. IT languages are, the first one we call it as markup languages.
Right.
First one we call it as markup languages. Second, modeling languages. Third, programming languages. Fourth, query languages. Right? So there are 4 different areas. One is markup languages.
Right.
Second, modeling language. Third, programming language. Fourth, query languages. What is markup language? Markup language means, for example, you want to create a login page. Okay. Normally, if you want to create a login page, you as a developer, consider that way. Okay. Forget about TOGAF, architecture and all everything aside for some time. Forget about all this. If you are a developer working for an IT applications, you want to create some login page. Okay. Normally, if you want to create a login page, there is a markup language called HTML, which is predominantly we use it. Of course, it's not HTML. Nowadays, we have AngularJS, right? So different JavaScript based tools we got. But one of the prominent markup language called HTML. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Using HTML, what we do, we can create, means if you want to create any kind of login page or something, we can create.
Right.
So for that, in back of it, you have to write the HTML code. You as a developer, okay, or a technical person, consider that way. Okay, because this is no way officially connecting to TOGAF or architectures, whatever we have started with. But if I explain this, it is more convenient for you to understand about microservices. So markup languages like HTML, DHTML, dynamic hypertext markup languages. At the same time, XML. XML stands for extensible markup language. For example, file formats. Let's say, for example, you are reading some file formats relating to healthcare organizations, also, all that. Normally, now and then we are using file formats of 2. One is XML, second is JSON. So
Right.
these are the file formats where whatever the data you want to incorporate, normally this will be in the XML format or JSON format or any other formats. So markup languages are front end, I can say, because when you talk about business, a presentation layer as a top, right? So presentation layer will be in the beginning. If you see any application, this markup languages and all everything are used in the presentation layer. Means if you want to present something on the screen, for example, you are working on some e-commerce application where you want to see what are the different products available on the screen and you want to select something, right? So this creates some user interface and user experience required. So for that is where generally we talk about presentation layer. Understood? Clear? Right?
Okay.
Point number 1. Point number 2, second we call it as modeling language. Let me write down the examples here. So the first one is called HTML, DHTML, etc. Right? So these are the examples for markup language.
Right.
Second, we call it as modeling language. Modeling language example is UML, which stands for Unified Modeling Language.
Okay.
Means, let's say you want to explain some functional concept. For example, we are developing some ATM system. Okay. So you want to explain this to the technical team, ATM system works or how ATM system functions. Or else you want to explain this to your technical team that how a person wants to withdraw money from his account, how can they withdraw? So you want to explain this process. Do remember, we are talking about modeling languages. The first one was discussed already. So one is about markup languages, all that was discussed already. Second, even I discussed about the modeling languages. Modeling languages means, for example, as an example I have taken. For example, you want to explain about, let's say, for example, you want to explain about uh, a withdrawal process. You want to explain a withdrawal process for an ATM application. If you want to explain withdrawal process for an ATM application, not all the functionalities are not so effective to explain orally. At the same time, even in documentation ways also it is difficult because it is really difficult for you to explain in the documentation manner. That's the reason why normally this is where generally this markup languages comes into picture. Means markup languages example is UML. UML is one kind of markup language where we prepare different diagrams, something like use case diagram, sequence, collaboration, component, deployment. So these are the different diagrams we create, right? So this is the second one. So using this markup language, what people using this modeling language, what people do, right? So using this modeling language, what normally people do, people will create some models. For example, you want to explain about the sequential process of a money person who is withdrawing about the money. You want to explain this process to your technical team. How can you explain that? You can prepare a sequential process. Customer will go to the ATM center, he insert the card, he give the ATM PIN number, etc. So there will be a menu page open, right? So he has to select the withdrawal money. And whenever he select the withdrawal money, it will ask you how much money you wants to withdraw. So if you can enter the money, provided if the money is lesser than the account balance, you get the money. Otherwise, you get a error notification called as your money is not sufficient, right? Insufficient money, insufficient funds.
Right.
So if you want to explain some processes while we are developing an application to the technical team, if you want to explain something in a visualized mode, this is where generally these modeling languages are being used. The one of the prominent modeling language we uses is called UML, which stands for Unified Modeling Language. Okay, this is what it is. Now, in continuation to that, I must tell you, as far as the architecture role is concerned, either we must be an enterprise architect, irrespective of the framework. Okay, either it can be TOGAF framework of anything. Let us keep it aside for some time. So whenever we are working as an enterprise architect or when we are working as a solution architect, whichever the architect roles, so you need to create some architectural diagrams. Even for that also, this modeling language called UML is being used. If you can remember yesterday's session, when it comes to the tools, I was mentioned a tool called Star UML. If you remember, Star UML.
Right.
Star UML is one kind of software. Like, of course, we have Visio as well. I don't deny that fact. But Star UML is one kind of software where we can create any UML diagrams, or if you want to create any DFDs, or if you want to create any kind of flow charts, right? So all these things we can prepare. This is point number 2, right? Modeling language. The third one is called programming language. Programming language. Okay. So this programming language, anything, right? So either it can be Java, it can be C, C++, it can be Python, because normally Python, it can be Kotlin, etc. Right? So there are different programming languages we have. But normally Java is a prominent language, a programming language knows to everyone. Java.
Right.
Why? Because Java is a programming language. Most of the web applications or client server applications we are developing. So for that, Java is a prominent language we are using for a very long time. At the same time, even Python has also that prominency nowadays, because especially whenever we are working on some data analysis projects, then Python is being used mostly. Like that, we have Kotlin, we have Swift, we have Gosu, different programming languages we have. So the next one about the query language. Next one about query language. Means, for example, if you want to extract some query, okay, the example is SQL. Okay, SQL is a query language. For example, you are working in a financial institution or a bank. Now you want to extract some reports of the customer, whoever is maintaining average $500 every quarter. You want to, for your business purpose, you want to know it. So what you want to do, whatever the data stored in the database, you have to extract the data first. Am I right or not? Right? You have to extract the data. So if you want to extract the data, there are some commands you have to give to the system, because system will accept the commands what you give, the way which it can understand. That's the reason why programming language is also the same case. For example, you and me are speaking in a language called English, because English is a common language which you and me can understand, so that we are speaking both together. In the same manner means human to human, right? So we are interacting with between human to human or among humans. We are following some language, either it can be English or any other language. But if you want to provide some instructions to the system, because if you are developing some core banking or online banking or ATM application or some e-commerce application, you want to provide some instructions to the system. How should it behave? How should it perform? How should it act? How should it works? So how can you do that? You have to provide an instructions through a programming language. This is one kind of language which a system will understand. Programming language is the language which system will understand. If you want to communicate system and if you want to give instructions, against to that, if you want to get the results and all, programming languages are being used. In the same manner, query language means if you want to extract the reports. For example, you are working in a financial institution, as is stated. You are maintaining large scale of data of your customers in your server. Now, for your business decision or for some other mean, you want to extract some reports from the server. Means you want to know people, age group between 35 to 45, average balance $500, whoever is maintaining, you want to have a report. You want to know the report. So that if someone is not maintaining and all, so that you can send the reminders to them, stated maintain average balance like that. For example, right? This is part of your business activity. You want this. So for that, what we have to do, there is a query we have to write in a form of query commands and all. By giving some commands and all, everything, we have to write some queries and all. So for that purpose, SQL is being used. Do you understand this, right? Understood or not?
Agree.
Right. So these are the languages will be there in the field of IT. Markup languages are hypertext markup language, etc. Modeling languages to create some models, etc. Programming languages where whatever the program, if you want to give instructions. For example, in the beginning, I told you, as a user, you have given 1 plus 2. Whenever you press the enter button, you are getting a result called 3. How you got this? Have you done any addition manually? No. System has understood the instructions what you have given and it is showing you the result. Why? Developer has written a program in such a way, adding of two numbers is a logic written by the developer in a form of code. Either it can be any programming language. Okay, I'm not getting into that. Either it can be Java or it can be C++. That is different. So using a programming language, what a developer has done, developer has written a logic so that you can see the result being a user. Query languages, I already told you. So these are the languages will be there in the IT side, IT applications. Now, coming back to the point, in context to the layers of the application, as I stated, Yeah. So as I stated, generally there will be of 3 layers. One is presentation layer. The first one is called presentation layer. You can see here. Second, business or logic layer. The third one is called a data layer. Okay, 3 layers. Here, this is a presentation layer. PL stands for presentation layer. Second, business or logic layer, which is called BLL. I'm writing down here. Okay, business or logic layer. The third layer is called data layer. DL. Okay, data layer. These are the 3 layers will be there, because if you are developing any application, there will be of 3 different layers. One is presentation layer. Second is a business or logic layer. The third is a data layer.